calls for a very different kind of exercise before thinking about law. It means,
One of the things, Barbara, that I know that Greg is researching is what kind of how one would determine a baseline. What would be involved in determining a baseline for an economic review, which really is ground zero in terms of even beginning to think about this.
A baseline can be about anything. And I think there are priorities that have to be set. What do you include? What data do you collect and what data do you not collect?
Yeah, yes.
That's the,
to go in that direction, also the town board would have to budget for a study that would do this to begin with, for which we need greater information. Right. Bill, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. So on the economic impact review, yes, it might be that the first time one needed to actually be done, that would be when, you know, the applicant has to pay for the assessment. I think the real question is, that might be when the baseline gets established, as opposed to the town having to fork over money now, when they might never actually wind up needing to do that study. So I'm not sure. The question I had in the context of the discussion we just had, in the proposed triggers that went out, there's also a proposed cap of 10,000 square feet that no development can be larger than that. So in the context of not being able to ban in site plan, does this require a town law that says there shall be no developments larger than 10,000 square feet in the town of Caroline, as opposed to being something that is in the site plan review law?
Yes.
Yes, takes a town law.
Yeah, or is through zoning. And I didn't even comment on that. I wanted to get to just parsing out what I believe were design standards with the site plan review law, but that was another topic to bring up. Yep.
And this doesn't mean that something like that couldn't be accomplished either through a standalone law or through zoning, which is we realize that that's a longer term process, but it might be perhaps it would be a more all-inclusive process. That's a question. That's a question. Our plan was to have this conversation and then pause to have the subcommittee do some more detailed work. What is the subcommittee's feeling about this right now?
I think we have some questions that it would be useful to talk over with Tim, Greg, and Mark, or you know, whoever is the appropriate group, to figure out what our next direction should be.
Right. So I mean, my proposal is that I think it's been helpful to get all this out in the air, but I think now it would be helpful for just the subcommittee to step aside with us, and we'll go over some of these details with the aim of distributing next week something concrete to the entire task force that's been revised and that we can discuss with the kind of detail that Ken pointed us to at the beginning in terms of going through particular items. I kind of didn't want to do that tonight based on a revised document that not everybody would have had time to look at, as well as the realization through Greg that document probably would want to be tweaked before we do this anyway. So what I propose that we do tonight is finish the task force meeting, and that the subcommittee go into private executive session and do some more detailed work. Everyone in agreement with that? We'll meet again next Monday, and we'll be sending you documents and a game plan this week. And we hope that you all profit from this free hour that some of us won't have tonight. And take a deep breath. And thanks a lot. So if you're not on the subcommittee and you could just sign off, that'd be great. Thanks. Ken, did you have something you wanted to say, or are you waving goodbye?
I'd like to be able to, oh geez. Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
I'd like to remain and hear what that committee, we're all part of a task force, and I'd like to hear what goes on. If you'd like me to be quiet that whole time, that's fine, but I'd like to be in on what goes on, please.
I think if anybody wants to stay, you can. I just would hope that the floor could be given to the group that's been working on this, because we'll have plenty of time. And it appears that we are going to be going a little bit slower also. So Greg, maybe you can go back to the document and just point us in a direction that you would like to go here.
Sure, thanks. I was looking into what Irene brought up, though. I think that's a fundamental pivoting point. That if it, I've never worked I've never had. Working with a town that doesn't have zoning is very rare, and there's a few in Cayuga County, but they often just don't need any staff help at all. And so I'm privileged to be working with Caroline on this, but I've been operating under certain assumptions, and Irene brings up something that might point us in a whole different direction, or maybe not completely that different, but it's a very fundamental thing that we need to understand. And while everyone was just talking there, I was just going through a town up in Cayuga County to see because there are certain requirements in their site plan review, and I'm trying to find that language in their local laws, and some of them I'm not finding. So I'm not convinced, but I also it sounds like Irene was, pretty certain about her conversations with Guy. And anyway, I'm just sort of in that mindset right now.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm just going to jump in here. This is Barb, that I'm just going to reiterate that I mean, fundamentally doesn't make sense to me by looking at the language that's throughout the current site plan review law, that yes, there are a number of things that, say very specifically, this relates to state law X. But there are a number of things that do not relate to any, state law or federal law or local law. And so just the whole premise seems to me shaky. And then further, I'll just make the statement, and this kind of relates to what Ellen, I think, said somewhat facetiously, but the first item in both, I think, the site review law list of standards and the or at least in the guidelines, is the question, does this proposed development comply with all local, state, and federal laws? And if the answer is yes, then I would assume it just goes ahead. I mean, what's the purpose of having any other kind of content if all that we're saying is you just have to abide by existing law? So there's something fundamentally weird about that line of argument to me. And that's why I think that really is a fundamental question to ask of the lawyer. Now, that said, I certainly see that there's a difference between making a kind of a blanket statement as a standard without having any third-party expertise to go to. And let me give an example here. So an example of that would be to say, for example, a development plan has to protect all species of reptiles, period. And an alternative to that would be that a development plan, site plan, has to protect all species of reptiles that are designated by the state as species of concern. Because that is, an outside expert, the state, has designated certain, species of reptiles as of special concern. Those are two different things where you have an existing third party standard that or an expertise that you can refer to. And that I get, but that's not the same as saying that there's an existing law that has to, has to be referenced in every single one.
It's a good point. Yeah.
I think
And
actually that's a great example, Barb, because there is a federal law about protecting endangered species. So that's a law, blah, blah. There is a state listing of threatened species, etc. But there's no state law that says, therefore, you can or can't do something. It's an identification tool. And so I think it's a very well stated point, is I don't think we can want to do something as vague as protect reptiles, but if we can say and point to some kind of a legitimating body that has identified these things, then I think we should be able to reference that. And again, I don't know whether we can do it in site plan law, and if we can't, then we have to find another way to do it.
And that's indeed the question, right? Because we have been told consistently, and this is where I think I would push back against Irene a little bit. We have been told consistently that we can enact legislation through zoning or through local law, and that site plan review can be grounded through zoning or through local law.
Mm-hmm.
So then why can't, this is my question, why can't our understanding of local law include this, right? And I think that's what we're all asking.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, were you going to say something?
I was, but I agree with what you said, and I'm going to hold off. I think we need to circle back to Guy and get clarity on this. So I think that's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
Ellen?
Ellen has her hand up now.
I would suggest that the subcommittee was working on things that we thought the town would want to see happen in law. And so rather than necessarily, when we take it to Guy, I would say, these are the things we want to happen. What do we have to do to make that happen in law? And can we just amend the site plan review law and put more standards in it? Or do we need something separate? So that's sort of the approach I would take. One of the things I wanted to get a little clarity on is there's a moratorium in place. And we were charged as a group to come up with ideas, etc. We've been working hard to try and come up with those and try and do things relatively quickly. What is the timeline in terms of the town board? The moratorium is going to be up in December, I think. Is that right?
Correct.
And if we, let's say we did have some recommendations, changing the design standards the way Greg has outlined them, which is much less than what the subcommittee has thought of the things we want to see, but it's something. But that still would have to go through a process. And if it is, it's unlikely that that process is going to take place before December. So I guess what I'm asking is, if there is something in process, can the moratorium be extended in order to move that forward?
The answer is yes, it
Okay.
can be.
Okay.
And I think that's a town board decision based on kind of what the feeling is about what we want to see result from the comprehensive plan, really, but also from the information from the task force as well. So.
And it's looking like the comprehensive plan wouldn't be accepted until December anyway, right now, because it hasn't been submitted to the town board yet, which will require an additional public hearing. and or potential revisions. So regardless, to finish the comprehensive plan, we could be up to facing the possibility of an extension just for that, which we want as the basis of anything that we're doing. Barb?
Yeah, just a question for those of you who are on the board or know how the board, what the what the desires of the board may be in serving the town. This is a question related to what should remain in the guidelines/standards. So currently, the guidelines are a series of about 24 questions. And some of those are fairly detailed, like the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 are fairly detailed about components of energy and sustainability. So those are things that already exist in the guidelines. One of the drafts, the latest draft, based on Greg's work, would move all of those energy items out of the guidelines/standards into the site plan review law. And I'm wondering just on the politics of that, you know, given that the guidelines were approved by the board to include all of that energy stuff at some point in 2018, you know, would there be any concerns about treating those differently, or you know, taking them out of the guidelines/standards separate standalone document and putting, you know, suggesting or recommending that those go in the site plan review law instead?
I mean, I will just say that I think I don't think there would be concerns about that. I think you know, like we've discussed tonight, you know, the first step will be talking with our attorney and figuring out if that's appropriate or possible or whatever. But I mean, I think the board supports those items, and if they fit within the law and could be enforced within the law, I think that would be supported.
Okay, and then the second question is related to kind of a synchronicity or timing issue. That if it was, you know, if the guideline/standard document included less areas, less topics than it does now, and that got approved, that could be on a quicker timetable than the revisions to the site plan review law, because that's a change in law. So we could end up with the situation of, you know, kind of removing content from the guidelines/standards before the site plan review law is revised to include those things that were deleted from the guidelines/standards, which could leave a window for the town to not be, you know, protected on those items. I would assume that's a concern for the board. And so, so there would need to be a synchronicity of making changes to the guidelines/standards document at the same time as revisions are made to the site plan review law, which would bump this out in terms of timing. Am I thinking about that correctly?
That's what we did in 2018. I think we brought them both forward at the same time.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Greg?
Not in particular, no. Yeah, it seems, sorry, and I was just going through this other, I was going through just another, just local law here, just trying to find, I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on this. If the site plan review can't regulate certain things outside of the site plan review, that would also go back to Barb's question about removing things from the design guidelines into site plan review, and maybe that's why they were in design guidelines anyway, or in the first place.
Exactly.
So I'm I'm just a little bit stuck right now on this. So
Sure. So we'll get guys' feedback and
yeah, I mean, and I could also even just ask my colleagues tomorrow.
okay.
You know that. So I just feel like I'm falling a little bit flat on my face right now because I'm not able to give a concrete sort of answer on this. But there are certain standards in this one site plan review law without zoning that they're not referenced in a local law. So that also could just be a negligent,
Exactly.
which often in these
Ambitious.
rural.
Yeah,
What's that?
ambitious.
If
Yeah.
somebody doesn't question it, there it is, you know?
Well,
Can I just, I'm sorry.
sorry. Yeah.
I just wanted to get back to what Barb was saying. And I just think that's important for us to keep in mind that ideally we would do the site plan review law changes and or separate laws that dealt with formula business and dealt with some other things we want to deal with, and change the design guidelines to more standards because that's the way Greg has redrafted them. Ideally, you do that all together as a picture. I think that it's unrealistic to expect that to happen fast. There's going to be controversy over, I would assume, some of that. So I just don't know, is it realistic to do them all at once? And if it's not realistic, then as Barb said, we don't want to be caught with having deleted a bunch of things from the design guidelines, past new guidelines that are specific about what a building can look like and where the parking is, but doesn't address a lot of the other issues that are addressed currently in the guidelines. So I just think we need to be careful that we don't end up with our cloak gone.
Yeah. And Greg, I'm assuming that the reason that you pulled out those items was to strengthen the whole package in relationship to the hierarchy of site plan and design.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, just to, that and the amended design standards, for one, they just didn't seem, I didn't see how they were actually design, they just could be called design standards, it seemed. I mean, it was.
So basically, you would not have written the current design guidelines that we have the way they are because of this other stuff in it.
Well, but I can see, Barb, I would imagine that you might say, but they were already in the design guidelines before. Yeah.
Right.
And that's where, I'm sorry, I'm a little, let me pull back a second. When I was explaining to the larger group a few minutes ago, I said this was part of my professional just judgment of parsing those things out. So that's those items that I put in my revised version of the design standards were what I've typically seen in a design manual. And so adding things about energy use and it seemed that those things could just be applied as part of the larger site plan review. To me, they just seem more appropriate as part of the site plan review, but I think that's certainly just debatable. And I think that's a matter of just how the town wants to apply them.
So let me just jump in and make a comment here because there will be more discussion and broader discussion and public hearings presumably on this, that whoever can do this, it might be useful to go back and look at the legislative history of why all of that energy stuff, and I mean, and there's a lot of detailed energy stuff, why it was put in the guidelines and not in the site plan review law. Because I take your point, Greg, that one could think of design as being really those kinds of physical things that an architect does or a landscape architecture does related to a site plan. And they're not the ones that are necessarily making the decisions about energy and and even lighting. I mean, so I get your point that traditionally all of those energy things might not be called design elements, but nonetheless they are currently for the town, and that's where I think understanding the legislative history. So going back and looking at the deliberations of the town board back in 2018 when those things were inserted into the guidelines might be useful knowledge to have as we move forward in this revision process.
And just following up on that, to Irene's position, perhaps they were included in the design guidelines because the town didn't have an official law on them, or there was no state law or county law, that they were just part of a recommendation, maybe by the county, and they were just included as that. I don't know. I don't. Maybe it's not worth it to waste time in
We
speculating
do have a
now.
native
Yeah.
informant in the room who is Mark, who was there.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, if you look at in the site plan review law, there's part M on energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, and that's all. The foundation of that is SEEKR, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and then it does reference Tompkins County did adopt some additional recommendations around 239 review, and so that's also referenced. And so yeah, I think the text in the design guidelines are aspirational things, as somebody else said, that we would like to see the developers go further to do these things. So anyway.
Mark, can I ask another question since you have the history on the site plan review law? So the subcommittee's digging around in terms of legal language to use suggested that the use of must language was much more legally defensible than the use of shall.
Mm-hmm.
Or should, and the current review law uses the word shall throughout. And so one of the things that the subcommittee's draft works with is actually recommending that shall throughout, unless there's appropriate exceptions, be changed to must. Again, is there any history on this that we should be aware of before we put the time into, producing a red line document that has must all through it?
Yeah, Barb, I don't know of any on that. So I think that should be part of the immediate question to the attorney, whether that matters or not.
Which we can do.
Yeah.
I was wondering the same thing this weekend, actually, when I was reading through it.
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Whether must is necessarily, let's call it, more prescriptive than shall. Is that right, Barb? Is that a good way of putting it?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which means if it's not, then there's no use in going through and remarking all of that stuff, if I understand the question. I mean, what's interesting to me in hearing all of this is one does not want to lose anything one does not want to lose the envelope of anything that's in the current design guidelines. And if one were to move them for one reason or another to site plan law, the only reason you do it is for more strength, right? And clearly what the subcommittee is going for in terms of design guidelines is more strength. And certainly more specificity also. I mean, it's a little bit of both as I read it. It's a little bit of more specificity, and a little bit of more specificity could give the review board more parameters in which to deliberate. So you wouldn't want to lose that either. So it seems to me that those are the directions that you're going in that we'll want to clarify with Guy. I wouldn't want for him to do a total markup of what you've done, because that could just get way too in the weeds, and the town board will have to do that anyway. I mean, the town board will do that. But I think if we can just clarify those two questions tomorrow, maybe if Mark is able to get to him that quickly. Mark has a rather good inside track getting with the guy. I think that'll really help us, right? This week. Helen?
Mark, could you clarify then what your understanding is of what you're going to be asking Guy?
Well, I will convene with Tim and Greg on this, but I'm going to ask him whether to either confirm or deny that the standards within the site plan review law need to be founded in existing law, town law, or other law. Whether and that'll answer most of our questions there about whether we can import design guidelines into the body of the law as design standards. So if his answer to that is yes, then we will not be able to do that. And then I want to ask him the shall must question, whether that's really relevant. So.
And then the other thing I'm interested in is, and maybe this is not the time, but it seems to me that it is okay, if the answer is no, that you can't put any requirements in the site plan review law unless they are grounded in some other law somewhere else, no requirements. In that case, my question is, if the town wants to adopt such requirements, and you've been listening to our discussions and you've seen some of the draft of the design standards that the subcommittee has worked on, and I'm sure they need, refining, but the general, some of those examples of the must statements, then I would want to know from Guy, okay, if we want to do that, what are the options we have for doing that?
Right. Where does that belong? Exactly. I think that's an important question. So, and yeah.
Should we move on to talking about some of the meat of things? And I would like to talk particularly about, to start with, the suggestion that Greg made for the Caroline design standards. Does the group all have those up and running?
Yep.
Maybe that's not where other people want to go, but I was just concerned about that and whether it addresses enough of what we care about to be worth pulling out.
So what's your question about that, Ellen? Because it seems like that's kind of what we're wrestling with, is that Greg's revision, focuses on building placement, massing materials, entrance, rooftop, lighting, parking, lighting, signage, landscaping, and leaves out a whole bunch of other stuff that's currently in the guidelines because those have been moved presumably into the site plan review law. So without understanding whether that's a good move, to move things out of the guidelines into the site plan review law, I'm not sure what your question is, because my basic response is, if the only thing that the review board has to rely on is the guidelines, then no, the briefer list that Greg produced is not adequate. But if those things, those other things are able to be moved into the site plan review law, and the review board can rely on those as a way to make judgments, then I'm not sure that it matters.
I guess I'm looking at that design standards revised document, and I'm a bit confused by the fact that it has some very prescriptive things, right? Ground signs are limited to no taller than 6 feet, a definite standard. And there are a bunch of other things like that. So if we can, there's no local law that says that. The fact that it's adopted as the guideline here as opposed to in the site plan review law, we're still putting it here as a requirement. So I'm just unsure about, you know, how this helps, that we pull out and we have these design standards, which are a lot of them are very specific. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I don't know, you know, whether it does what we want it to do. But then it throws in something and says natural features. Important natural characteristics or site features should be preserved and enhanced. That's basically back to the original kinds of design standards. You could do it as a question. Does it preserve, you know, important whatever, whatever? Those are not defined. I don't know what we mean by natural characteristics or features. So,
Yeah, Ellen, I'll comment on that, or both those. So the language about the signs wasn't altered from the edits that you all had sent me. I believe that
Right.
that was taken from Danby's guidelines.
Right.
So that was kept the same. And then the section on natural features, I didn't expand on that. Again, I felt like it was getting to be about 4 o'clock on that Saturday, and I just wanted to get this to you, showing where I thought certain types of topic areas could be parsed out. So my long email to you all was trying to say these can be expanded on as part of design standards.
but I guess my confusion is these design standards, some of them are very specific and prescriptive.
Mhm.
You can't have signs that are taller than 6 feet or whatever it is, stick up more than 6 feet. That's definite and prescriptive. And I guess what I'm a little bewildered about is you either can or you can't be prescriptive.
Right.
And here they are being prescriptive, but we're being told we can't be prescriptive. So I'm a little bit confused.
Mark?
Yeah, I hear you. And I think this goes back to the fundamental question to Guy
Yeah.
about, you know, the basis for these design standards or design guidelines, whether they have to be in some kind of local law or some law somewhere. So I see this as related to that issue.
I mean, what's strange is when we were talking to Guy about this earlier in the summer,
Mm-hmm.
there was a series of emails that Mark had with Guy, and I think it was even around the Danby, I believe it was around the Danby design guidelines, right? And Guy writes back, and I call it typical Guy fashion from what I've come to appreciate. And basically says, you can do what you want, but if you do, you should be careful not to rein yourself in. That's basically the principle. That was the principle. In other words, the advantage of design guidelines is that they're flexible, so that because you don't know what you're going to run into the future, so you want to keep them flexible. And if you have prescriptive regulations, it basically, from a town point of view, would limit the flexibility of the review board, right, to work with clients. I mean, that's the logic. But I don't recall him anywhere saying you can't do it. And that's what we had to find out. I just didn't see that. That's what, and I've certainly haven't wanted to mislead anybody in the past couple of months, but we had all of the state law that we've read that specifically says, and Irene just hasn't read this stuff, specifically says zoning or local law, right? And we saw this numerous times.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, Tim.
But I guess the difference is that site plan itself is a separate thing.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So there's zoning statutes, how to adopt local laws and what can be in a local law, and then there's site plan review. And
So that may not be our vehicle.
Right.
correct.
Michelle?
I feel like this is a really dumb question, but isn't the site plan review a law? I mean, it's a law, right?
Yeah.
So doesn't that count as your local law?
It is a
You
local.
would think you would think, and I don't know what I'm having trouble figuring, but no, it is specific. When I was reading tonight, the site plan definition, that comes from a very specific section in town law that has nothing to, that does talk about either zoning and local laws, and then the site plan review sort of is the process for which to apply those standards in those laws.
Hmm.
So the fundamental question is, how do we do what we want to do?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Thank you.
What Ellen was saying. Yep.
And I think it's clear what we want to do. It's clear what this subcommittee wants to do. Hasn't been approved by the task force as a whole, and certainly point by point is a different issue. But I think that at least we have to get that clarification, because it really is it's going to determine everything else that we do from here on out. I personally don't think we should be, I mean, I would have, we've been working really, really hard and really, really fast. If we could get something on the table within the next few weeks. If we don't, I don't think that's the end of the world. I mean, I think that we can work with the town board if there's all of this momentum going on and talk about potentially an extension of the moratorium. And I think that Mark and I have a sense that the board would be probably amenable to that. And there's background for this.
So what does that mean, Tim, as far as you're concerned, for how we can move forward and make progress?
I don't know. I mean, this is all, it's just raising a lot of questions. I mean, I still would recommend personally, if we find out that basically there's still going to be no teeth, I still think that we can strengthen the dentures to a certain extent, by delineating these more specific guidelines. I mean, I certainly think that we can do that. And I don't see why the review board can't be insistent in relationship to that. That's different than being prescriptive.
Well, I think that it's fairly clear that at least the subcommittee wants to see must statements.
Yes.
And what I would like to suggest is that we get some answer from Guy sooner rather than later. Would be terrific.
Yep.
And I would be content to have the subcommittee working with Greg to try to flesh out all of the various statements that we made, and try and, there are various things, which is how do we ground that in something that's a good map, or how do we word it such that it's what we want, and how do we deal with the fact that there are different scales and maybe we don't require the same thing of everybody. But I would like us to move forward on that with the idea that if it's not part of the site plan review law, fine, we'll find another way to put that forward. I'm not happy with simply revising the design guidelines to be more detailed questions. Personally, I'm not sure. Sitting on the review board, I don't know what to do with that. But
you're thinking that it just would make no difference whatsoever. Is that what I'm hearing?
You mean I can ask them more specifically? I suppose that helps. But what happens when they say, I don't care? There's not much I can do about it. I mean, I had quite a discussion with Guy when I, said if the site plan is not consistent with with the comprehensive plan, I'm not supposed to approve it, but I'm not allowed to deny it. I mean, I just felt.
I know. It doesn't make any sense.
It didn't make sense.
No.
So anyway,
Okay,
I think we can move
the one thing
forward.
that I wanted to mention, Ellen, because you brought up the maps and stuff. I noticed today that you requested some mapping from the planning board and stuff. Our planning board are from the Tompkins County planners, the GIS people. Our planning board probably has most of that stuff because we've requested all of these kinds of things for the comprehensive plan.
So how would I do that without burdening Bill?
Boy, you can just ask Bill. That wouldn't be a burden. He'll know if he has it or not.
Okay.
you know, I don't think Bill would mind, right, Mark?
I know he did not have the significant farmland because I did try that through him.
Okay.
He might well have had the land cover.
I don't think we have the land cover, but I think we had more specific, we have more specific mapping about housing and businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't know if that's what you meant by land cover.
No, I meant where are, because if part of our desire is to protect habitats that are important for species that are of particular concern, then knowing where there are meadows and where there are, so that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, I just thought I'd mention it.
Thank you.
So
So
could
what
we
do you got
talk
with-
about the to-do? We have about 10 minutes or so left. Who's going to do what, and is the subcommittee supposed to be doing anything between now and Monday, and how are we going to arrive at having documents appropriate to share with the task force, or are we changing that goal?
It seems that that's hinging on Guy's answers.
I don't agree.
Okay.
So what do you recommend, Dylan?
I think that we ought to continue to work to refine those 26 or whatever there were, to get them a little more concrete, to wrestle with, can I get you a list of those species of particular concern? Can I, I think we ought to wrestle with that, because as far as I'm concerned, I think we're going to put those forward to the town board for something that either would become part of a new local law of some kind based on, what town law can be, or as part of the site plan review law, if it can be there. And I don't exactly care where it's housed, and I don't think they would have to read very differently. It's more a matter of, what do we want to see enacted?
Yeah, maybe I might make a suggestion, and I can clarify some things too. And that might be a good approach of, regardless of where these things are, what do you want? And I think you've started to list that out. We want to see this. Certain things definitely do not need local law. So asking for existing conditions, such as we want to have a map, we need to see a map of these environmental resources, and such as the standards that you're proposing about not impacting certain agricultural soils, prime and significant agricultural soils. I don't see why that would need a local law, because those are soils, protected, not necessarily protected by New York State, but they are of importance of New York State. But I think your approach is good, of just listing things that would help for the site plan review process. I guess the next step is then defining, well, can these resources be impacted or no? Is there that threshold of impact that we've been trying to define, of 3,000 feet or over, or is it a certain lot coverage? Yeah.
One of the things that I'm just thinking about off the top of my head is how to present a tool that is the most economical in terms of moving forward with. And just listening to and reading all of those, those recommendations. And that's what I thought that Greg was getting at, but perhaps not, whether it would make sense to parse, if we can't do them as design standards. Let's just start with that, and we should know by tomorrow, I think, hopefully. But if we can't do them by design standards, would it be most effective and efficient to package all of these things together, or would it be most efficient to parse them out into 2 or 3 different classes, such as ecology, land mass, et cetera, Barb?
So to make a suggestion here, part of the concern has been that, at least among the subcommittee since Saturday night, is that the guidelines have now been kind of taken apart so that some things are in the guidelines and some things are in a revised site plan review law. What I would suggest might be useful for purposes of discussion and clarity with the task force is to take the existing guidelines, which are the 24 questions, and cross out, each of those questions, but like strike through so you could see what it was, and then insert the language that we are recommending for each of those elements and the additional elements. And so have that document. So it's essentially a new guideline/standard document that has everything, which are the outcomes that the subcommittee is recommending we try to achieve with this. But then also do a revised site plan review law, which includes not more standards content, because that's in the separate document, but it includes the things that are missing from the site plan review law that correspond to the things in the standards document. And for the most part, that would be additional definitions, because we've added some things to the standards that then or to the guidelines document that need to be defined in the site plan review law. So for example, the site plan review law currently does not define what prime agricultural soils are, and that soils or lands of statewide agricultural significance or importance, whatever the language is. So because those two terms are used in our revised guidelines, those two terms need to be defined in the site plan review law. So Greg, it would be, going back and kind of you taking out of the site plan review law those things that you removed from the guidelines and put in the site plan review law, and just keeping in the revised, showing the changes, the red line in the site plan review law revision, the definitions, and those things that kind of support then the elements that we're adding to or changing in the guidelines document.
Just to make sure I have that, you're just asking me for adding in definitions of topics that aren't already defined.
There are, yeah, but we've already done that. I mean, we already added to, like our revisions that we sent you of the site plan review law already did a lot of that, to add it in definitions. So our revisions were to add in definitions. Your revisions were to keep the added definitions that we added, but then also take some things out of the guidelines and put them in the standards. And that's what I'm saying, just for purposes of discussion and clarity with the task force, let's not do that latter step of moving things out of the guidelines and putting them in the law, because that just gets way confusing. And if Guy says, oh, it's okay to do that, and it would be better to just have a site plan review law and don't even have a guidelines document, then we can move it all in. But I think it's hard for task force members to realize what's already in the guidelines, those two dozen things in the guidelines, because just given the task force discussion, I'm perceiving that there are some comments and questions and concerns being raised about the content of things that already exist in the town's guidelines. And so I think people need to understand what the baseline is. And by doing that all in one document where you cross out the existing language so people can see what's existing, and then put what the revised language would be, plus the new language, I think, to me, that seems like that would be more straightforward.
Yeah, I realized that my process, it might have been a little bit of a shock, and that's what I was trying to clarify with my email of this is not done. I just took a crack at it on sort of my own kind of thought process in terms of what I've typically seen in development manuals versus the process that allows those standards to be applied. But I recognize that was they are becoming very different. So, all right, Barb, I can. basically what I'm hearing is I'll take the documents that I received from you all before I edited them, correct?
Mhm.
And then just at least go through and add definitions that might be missed, or my, because I heard there's something that there still needs to be definitions that need to be added.
Can I try?
Yeah, go ahead,
Um,
Ellen.
So I think the subcommittee recognized that we were using terms that were not in the definitions of the site plan review law.
Yes.
And so we did add those definitions. And your proposed site plan review law that you sent forward had those new definitions. It defined prime farm soils, it defined natural resource stuff. So it had them in there. So I don't think Barb is suggesting that you have more definitions to do. I think they're all there. What she was suggesting is, because this is a confusing deal, and because we don't know where our must statements should go, maybe they'll be in a site plan review law. I basically kind of agreed with you that we were making these design guidelines into hard rules, standards, and that those probably really can't just stay as a separate standards document. I don't know that, but that they probably might be best embedded in the site plan review law. But right now, refusing to people to put them there, and then they're going to be going back and forth between documents. So I think the suggestion is, let's leave the guidelines standards document that the subcommittee worked on. Don't leave it, but let's continue to work on that, but have that be something separate. And I liked Barb's idea that there could be, I mean, it's important for people to see what's existing there now and what we're proposing to change. And rather than trying to now embed that in the site plan review law, which we don't know that that's going to be where they're going to go, we don't know. But let's just work on those statements and see if the committee agrees that those are things we want to see happen, that they're worded in a way that they can basically agree with, and then we can figure out where to take them. So I would like us to continue to work on that 26 or however many there were, because I do think there was some refinement that we needed to do. And we'll get them as ready as possible, and they'll go wherever it seems legally that they should go. I don't know, that's my idea.
Okay. Then I assume that I'm just standing by then.
Well, I think that, no, if you could, Greg, if I understood Barb also, I think it would be helpful to make sure that we have kind of a redlined version available so that the members of the task force can see what's currently in the design guidelines and how that language is being changed item by item. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it's already, it seems that it was already.
Is that what you were asking for, Barb? Or did I totally miss the point?
Yeah, that's what I understood too. Is it just track changes with keeping?
Well, I wouldn't suggest using track changes. I would suggest going into the document physically and coloring the font red for the changes that are made, or adding physical strike through, because track changes just messes up documents for people who don't have the appropriate version of Word. But what I'm saying, Greg, is that the subcommittee sent you our revisions for the site plan review law that included three things. One, it included changing shall to must. And we don't know now if we can do that or not. Secondly, it included adding a variety of definitions, which are needed because the new guidelines that we're recommending include new concepts, and so they need to be defined. And then the third thing that our revisions to the site plan review law, the document that we sent you, included were some cleaning up to make sure that, like, language of mobile homes is referred to, just some little things throughout.
But we also included triggers, Barb.
Yeah, and included triggers. So it included, the acreage or the, the size, square footage, that kind of stuff. So that the document that we sent you of the site plan review law is basically okay, but we also then in the guidelines document that we sent you was really all marked up and had a lot of notes from Monday's meeting,
Yeah.
and that was the one that we thought you were going to fine tune the guidelines document to include, you know, what the original guidelines are that exist now, strike those out, put the new guidelines that we're suggesting, you know, put the language in there, and then look at that new set of guidelines, you know, based on what we sent you and what Monday night's discussion was, then do another look at the site plan review law revisions that we sent you and say to yourself, now that I have this list of revised guidelines from the subcommittee and the Monday night task force discussion, is there anything else that needs to go in the subcommittee's version of the site plan review law that they didn't catch because they were waiting for the update to the revised guidelines? So that step still needs to happen to compare those two documents, but we gave you a really good start on the content of the revised site plan review law, but it still needs to be compared against the updated guidelines, updated since, you know, including the discussion from Monday night's task force last week, which we did not do.
Got it. I understand what you need me to do. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I was expecting. Okay. Yeah. I got it. So
Ellen and Michelle, does that make sense what I'm saying? Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And do you think that we should, as a subcommittee, get together with Greg and talk through the 26 or 27 things? Because I think there's some of them are pretty clear and some of them we were still scratching our heads.
Yes, I think that if Tim indeed wants to have the task force discuss these in a substantive manner on Monday night, they still need work. You know, that's what we were going to be doing. But you know, the next step though first is to kind of put those two documents in sync with one another, and then we need to kind of fine tune the, you know, the content, because there are some things like you know, like some of the energy things that used to be questions in the guidelines and are now stated as standard language for the guidelines probably don't pertain to, you know, to all developments, and so we you know, there is stuff that we need to clean up in there.
I don't think it needs to be sequential, Barb. I think we can work on refining those 26, 27 while Greg is also looking at it. I mean, it would be nice to get it in sequence, but I don't know how quickly Greg can do that because he's got other jobs. And we're trying to get something done to get in people's hands a few days before next Monday, right?
Yeah, we just need to make sure then that what the subcommittee changes, further changes are, then get added into Greg's revised documents.
I mean, Greg, do you have a clue when you'd be able to get us something?
Well, yeah. I mean, I can work on this. I've blocked out time for tomorrow. I like to get the note. I want to get the notes done for the meeting done tomorrow, but because there are smaller notes, because there was only an hour, then that, you know, I mean, I can work on them tomorrow night. I still really, I would like to hear from Guy though, before. I think some of these do. I mean, I can make these sort of Word document changes that you're asking for, Barb. I hear that you just want me to go through and you know, just make that very, very clear for the rest of the task force to consider. But I also hear that you would like for certain proposed design standards to be sort of flagged or recognized as might needing to be elsewhere. I mean, because that's
No,
where
I'm not suggesting that at all.
I guess I'm having a hard time understanding what, like, in terms of the sequential order of things. it,
So why don't I do this? I will take the documents. I'll work on this tomorrow. I'll take the guidelines document that the subcommittee produced last week, try to add in the substantive discussion from the task force from last week. I'll compare it then to the redlined site plan review law that the subcommittee produced. And I'll look at the two documents, and then I'll send it out to the subcommittee members and Greg and Mark and Tim.
And then we'll schedule a
Okay.
meeting to discuss.
And Ellen, if you and Michelle then can work on finding a time for everybody to meet later in the week, but not over the weekend, because
Right.
we need
Right.
time then after that meeting to make whatever revisions are needed to be able to have something substantive to send to the task force.
And at our meeting, you and I and Michelle and Greg, I don't know your availability to be at meetings. What's your story?
this week I'm free every night, and I'm happy to join.
Good.
Yeah, Barb, I understood what you wanted me to do. I was just saying that it seemed that if Guy said something where these standards can't be revised this certain way, they're too strong, they can't go into design guideline, they have to be, or design standards, they have to be somewhere else, like a local law. It seemed kind of like a waste of time to go through them.
But let me make a comment about that, Greg. That's exactly what we're not saying. We're not saying put any new content in the site plan review law except definitions and triggers.
I understand that.
Right?
I understand, but
So that's not really a Guy question. So to Ellen's point earlier, which her point was to at least get the task force to look at the language and the concepts that we as the subcommittee are proposing, and see if the task force buys into that. If they buy into that, if they agree with all of those, and then Guy tells us, oh, you can't do number 10 in guidelines, you have to do number 10 in a new law, a new town law, then great, then we know that. But we know that the task force has agreed that number 10 is a good thing to do. And so, so we've already had that conversation with the task force, rather than Guy just saying in general terms, no, you can't do some stuff and you can't do some stuff, and just maintain flexibility. That's not real helpful at this point. We need to get the task force to weigh in on whether they think, like, the subcommittee is real high on trying to protect prime agricultural soil and farmland of statewide importance. If the rest of the task force think that's a bunch of hooey, we need to know that.
Right.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess. Yeah. Sure. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I guess. Yeah.
You guess what?
Oh, I'm just thinking, is the idea that each of the subgroups will bring their ideas to the full group for endorsement? Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, I mean, Mark, I think what we want to do right now, next week, is walk through this document and see what consensus there is for each of these, let's say roughly 20 points, right?
I see. I gotcha. Yeah.
For now. I mean, whatever else happens is different. I mean, we've already had 3 working groups. The working group on formula business restriction has basically recommended against a law on that, suggesting that it would be better addressed through zoning. And the group on economic review, I think, still has some thinking to do.
Did the task force agree that formula business ought to be part of zoning? Did we? I don't remember agreeing. Not saying I didn't, but I don't
think there's been a specific vote on that. I mean, that was what the subcommittee recommended.
So I guess, to me, one of the questions I was thinking about is the charge to the task force included, what should we do about formula business? Do we want zoning? address those things. And really, we've zeroed in largely on this design standards thing. And I'm thinking that when we get an answer from Guy about, okay, how could we accomplish these things we want to accomplish, then we're in a position to say we think we need zoning or whatever. Right now, I'm not in a position to know whether we need zoning, because those 20 odd items are the things I feel most strongly about. And if we can do them as design guidelines, fine, then maybe we don't need zoning. All I'm saying is, I didn't agree about the formula business thing. I think we need to address formula business. And if we can't do it through the site plan review law, I'm not sure I want to wait for zoning. I mean, that word is going to send people
Well, let's
up
not
there.
worry about that tonight, Ellen. I mean,
Okay.
this is,
I hear you, but I just didn't want to be said that I have agreed that it shouldn't be its own law. That may be the most efficacious way to go.
okay.
Right.
So has
Yeah.
everybody agreed with what we're doing? And
Okay.
Mark, you'll contact Guy. And it's pretty clear what you're asking him, right? Good.
I just want to be sure with the subcommittee, I'm going to be doing the notes tomorrow. I can also work on the site plan and design guidelines as they are, unless Barb, you feel that you would like to just take them as well, and then
I'll do them. I'll do the next pass at them,
okay.
and then I will send them to the subcommittee, Ellen, Michelle, and me. And I will also send them to you, Greg, and to Tim. And then you all can advise what the next step is on that. I'm assuming that the subcommittee, Barb, Ellen, and Michelle, is going to try to meet towards the end of this week. You know, maybe we can aim for Thursday, ladies. So I'll let you guys kind of work on that. And Greg, if you wanted to join for that, you know, I think that's fine. If Tim wanted to join, that's fine too. But the subcommittee, I think, will need to take a look at the next revision. But I should, by the end of the day tomorrow, I'm trying to clear my calendar. I should have both documents to you all that I mentioned by the end of the day tomorrow.
Great.
So Barb, did you just do that tonight? You just cleared your calendar so you would have time?
You want that kind of magic, don't you, Mark?
I'm still working on doing some clearing, but yes, I'm in that process.
That's a great technique. I like it.
It is.
Sounds great.
I just want to say before we go, I can certainly be available to join you Thursday if you would like,
Good.
but if you want to just discuss, you know, just privately.
Is Thursday okay with you, Michelle?
I'm just, what time on Thursday? Are we talking about evening or during the day or what?
I'd prefer during the day, but whatever. Yeah, I don't know what works.
Could we do it at you know, sort of late afternoon? Would that work for Greg and everybody?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I won't be able to, but
Okay.
So what is your availability on Thursday, Greg?
it would be after 4:30.
Okay.
Okay.
4:30.
Yeah.
I'm kind of busy till 5 too. So
Okay. All right.
we'll talk.
That's,
Yeah.
Thursday's
So,
a hard day for me, but
okay. Well, why don't you guys talk among yourselves and come up with some possible times?
Sounds good.
wait, tell me again, Greg, after 4:30 you
Actually, for
said?
the rest of you want
Yeah, I work till 4:30 every day, and I'm
this?
clear after that on Thursday. I'll just block it out just in case if you want to include me. I'm happy to join.
And
Okay.
Michelle, could you do that kind of time on Thursday? Like,
Which time?
I don't know, 6
What time?
o'clock? 5:30,
Um,
5:30,
mm.
5 o'clock?
I have to think about it because I have some. I have to talk to my. I have some babysitting duties here. So
Okay. Those are
I have to
important.
figure out about people's schedules. So
Important. Okay.
Thursday's a nightmare day here. So anyway,
Okay. All right.
maybe that's too strong. Anyway.
Is Wednesday better, Michelle?
So I have a review board meeting at 7:30 on
Okay.
Wednesday.
So that won't
Yeah,
work.
Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah, I have something
Do it
already
before
scheduled.
that.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'll think of some on Thursday. I just need to think about it. It's a
All
little
right,
bit.
great.
All right,
Okay.
Hi, y'all.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Okay.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
All right.
All
Bye.
right, see you.
Great work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.